No. There is a report on Washington Post that says the Pentagon is assessing whether to reduce the U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf, and they're talking about considering including to move the forces toward Jordan, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And the question is, how far can they go? Because it's Saudi Arabia, it's just it doesn't mean that they're going to get in away from the Iranian missiles, being the target of Iranian missiles. And how do you see the outcome of or what has happened so far in the war, considering the American bases in the region? I'm sure that they're seriously thinking of what's going on and what they have to do in the near future.
Well, we have two issues. One, we have a military issue, and the other one, we have a political problem. The military issue sort of solves itself. We until we have a peace with Iran, we can't reoccupy in a meaningful fashion the bases that have been largely destroyed by Iran. So now you have to ask yourself, as a military guy, how do I accomplish my mission with reduced infrastructure? Where do I relocate my forces? And this is what's happening. We're pulling back to Jordan, to air bases in Jordan. We're pulling into Saudi Arabia, and we're pulling some assets into Israel, and we're pulling some assets into Europe. Crete, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Romania. We're moving in that direction. This is just a temporary thing, though, because then the question is, what is our military mission? Because and that is where politics comes into play. I believe that there's a recognition that we cannot sustain a conflict with Iran over time. And I also think that there's a recognition that the United States lacks the capacity to reorient the totality of its military infrastructure so that we could have the ability to project into the Middle East meaningful military power capable of solving the problems that we can't solve today, like seizure of the Strait of Hormuz, occupation of Iran's nuclear facilities, and the elimination of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. We don't have a military solution to those problems, which means that it's irresponsible to say that that's now our military mission. I think the military mission will be redefined based upon strategic political objectives. And right now, the first strategic political objective is, how do we get out of the Middle East in the least disruptive way? How do we get out of the Middle East in the least disruptive way? And one way is through retrograde operations towards Europe, meaning we move towards Jordan and Israel. But that's not sustainable. I mean, what is Jordan? Is Jordan part of Europe? Is Jordan part of the Middle East, of West Asia? And of course, they're part of Middle East and West Asia, which means eventually Jordan will have to gravitate towards this. This is what happened in, when we talked about Syria and Iraq and American military presence in Syria. I always said the moment Iraq becomes unsustainable, Syria is resolved. And look what happened. Iraq became unsustainable. We're out of Syria in a heartbeat. Solved its problem. Kuwait's now unsustainable. We're out of Iraq. And now that, which means we're out of Bahrain. Logistically unsustainable. Can't happen. So we'll fall back. Saudi Arabia, I don't know how much longer we're going to be there, but, Saudi Arabia has begun to look elsewhere for its strategic security requirements. It now has this pact with Turkey and Pakistan. There are alternatives to American weaponry out there that Saudi Arabia can buy into if necessary. We have energy issues that, even though we're not buying Saudi energy today, it impacts the global energy security market. So we may hold on to Saudi Arabia, hold on to a military posture. So Saudi Arabia, I just remind the people, they can't fight. Just remember that. It's not like, when we withdraw from Saudi Arabia, the Saudi army is going, we got this, boss. We got it. We're the Saudi army. We're strong. We lift weights every day. We run 6 miles with heavy weights on our back. We're ready to fight. No, these are the fat guys that get wiped out by Ansarallah every time they go head to head. All right. And Saudi Arabia knows that if they're left exposed, they're going to lose southern Saudi Arabia. Southern Saudi Arabia used to be part of Yemen. And the Yemeni may decide to come and take it. I know during the Gulf War, in the run up in the fall of 1990, we sent the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade to Saudi Arabia, Eastern Saudi Arabia, and they set up. We're going to stop the Iraqis if they come down. So we got one brigade of Marines. I think we had another brigade of airborne out there someplace, and we're going up against several divisions of the Iraqi Republican Guard. Now, Marines are pretty damn good, Nima, and I will never shy away from a fight. Give me a K-bar, I'll take on a tank any day of the year, but I'll die. They'll give me a medal, bury me nicely, whatever remains of me. But Marines aren't going to run away from a fight. But we knew what we were. We were speed bumps. If the Iraqis had decided to drive south, there was nothing we could do to stop them. Straight up reality. So we're sitting there going, "Hey, Saudi Arabia, by the way, we're in your country to help you, and you got this army down there hanging out by the Yemeni border. Why don't you bring some of those brigades up here, at least pretend like you want to fight with us and die with us to defend your country?" And the Saudis were going, "No, because those are Yemenis. We're scared of them. We're not leaving our border unprotected." This is the reality. So Saudi Arabia has to deal with the Yemen problem. Now, Pakistan, there was some talk a couple years ago, I think, where Saudi Arabia, made a big deal about getting the Pakistanis to deploy one of their divisions to help out in Yemen, and the Pakis said no, and that caused a little bit of a brouhaha. But Saudi Arabia is dependent upon Pakistan for manpower and the officer rank especially. And what we could see, as long as it doesn't involve the deployment of Pakistani troops into Yemen, because I think Pakistan will reject that, but we could see with this new pact where Pakistani troops come in and help, secure Saudi's border with Yemen, and this might give the Saudi Arabians more confidence, and maybe the Pakistani Air Force can come in and help reinforce the Saudi Air Force and the security of Saudi airspace. And when that happens, then and Turkey here, because here's another big one. People never think about this, but I'll ask you: how many? Let's just do some basic questions. Is Qatar and Saudi Arabia, are they friends? And the answer is no, not at all. Has Saudi Arabia threatened Qatar militarily in the past?
Yeah.
How many troops does Turkey maintain on Qatari soil? Thousands. Why? To protect Qatar from Saudi Arabia. But I thought Turkey and Saudi Arabia just signed a defense pact. See, it's not as easy as it looks, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually a pretty complicated situation. I think once the Saudis and the Turks can actually resolve some of their regional differences, Saudi Arabia will feel confident enough to tell the Americans to leave. But in the meantime, America is one giant security blanket. I mean, I used to have a blanket when I was a kid. It's still one of the most traumatic moments of my life. I had this blanket, and it was my little blanket. And I carried that blanket everywhere. I was just sitting there sucking my thumb with my blanket. And I had that blanket as a child. And I remember I got to kindergarten, I had that blanket. And I'm moving into first grade. And this blanket is no longer a blanket because I used to pick at the fuzz too. That was my thing. I had the blanket. I would pick at the fuzz, make little fuzz balls and all that. And one day my mom came in and saw this threadbare thing on there. And she said, "No." And she threw that blanket away. Boom, my world ended. I mean, that was it. I no longer had my blanket. It was just impossible for me to live. Now, eventually I grew up and got away with it. But the United States is that security blanket to Saudi Arabia. And right now it's sort of threadbare. Saudi Arabia's been picking the fuzz at it. But they still need that blanket to go to bed tonight. They still suck their thumb. At some point in time, in order to get rid of that blanket, they're going to have something else that's going to replace it. And is it going to be this pact, this Turkish-Pakistani pact? I don't know, because there's some inherent problems. Again, Pakistan's already told the Saudis to pound sand when it comes to providing troops to resolve the Yemen situation. What kind of ally does that? And Turkey's got troops deployed to Qatar to fight the Saudis in case they make a move on Qatar. What kind of ally is that? So this isn't what it all seems to be, everybody. We know it's not about Iran. Everybody said, even the Iranians are like, that doesn't bother us. But what's it about? Israel? Or it's just about they don't know what to do because there's now a psychological vacuum in the security realm because the United States just got their butts handed to them by the Iranians. And everybody's going, how do we live going on? So they're trying to construct something. We'll see. But eventually, I believe the United States will have to leave Saudi Arabia as well, because Saudi Arabia is no longer going to be focused, gravitated towards the United States. They're going to be shifting their focus of attention elsewhere. But they've got a lot of problems they have to resolve. Remember what I said earlier about letting Mother Nature run its course? You know who's pretty good at that? You know, one of the best Mother Nature practitioners of foreign policy in the world today, China. China's pretty good about just saying, let it happen. Let's see what happens. See, you know how China does, you know what BRICS is? I mean, not BRICS, but BRI, Belts Road, the build,
Belt and Road Initiative.
Belt and Roads Initiative. Yeah. It's the equivalent I talked about in my college. See, China's got this big, giant, you know, hypothetical satellite above there taking a picture of the global economy. And they look at it and they go, I don't have to invent trade routes. They exist. I just need to take control of them. Build a port here, build a port there, connectivity, things flow through naturally. Why don't we do this? So if you take a look at Belt Roads Initiative and look at how China has overlaid its thing, it's all done upon the natural flow of the global economy. China's not trying to force anything. China's just taking advantage of what exists and making it function even better. I mean, look what they just did. Nobody's talking about it too much, you know, but China set up this company now that is doing scheduled service from Chinese ports into Europe using the Northeast Passage around Russia. It's 20 days, I think, is what it takes, as opposed to 40 plus days. So it cut the time in half. Costs are lower. It's just the Chinese doing it better than anybody else on a scale. I mean, anybody can say, well, I ran a ship through there. Well, China's just running a ship. They're running ships. It's a big line, giant container ships going through, taking advantage of Russia's 43 icebreakers, including several nuclear power icebreakers. And China's on good relations with the Russians, which means that their icebreaker fees are going to be lower, and they lower the cost of doing it. It's just called letting. The Chinese are really good at this. And the Chinese right now, when they look at the Middle East, remember, they got the Saudis and the Iranians to have a rapprochement once, because it's the natural course of things. See, the United States is the antithesis of the natural course of things. We try to create friction. We purposely create friction so that we have nations fighting together, because we've decided it's best to sell weapons and permanently keep the region unstable. But what happened there? It leads to a Strait of Hormuz type situation, which isn't just bad for America, bad for the world, bad for the region. And the United States now is the problem, not the solution. So what is the solution? Stop trying to force things. Let Mother Nature run its course, and it will happen. And the Chinese, when that happens, the Chinese sort of moving, because they're the best in the world at saying, hey, let's let it run its course. They'll figure out what's the best pathway and all this stuff, and things will run at maximum efficiency. That's your solution. Get the United States the hell out of there, especially with this current leadership.
Scott, you've mentioned the psychological vacuum. I think that perfectly fits this situation that Saudi Arabia is in right now. And the other point is those blankets that you mentioned, it is American blanket or a Turkish blanket, these blankets are not going to save them from the Yemeni attacks. This is the problem for Saudi Arabia. And just moments ago, before coming to this live, Yemen, you know, they have published a new statement. It says that a blockade for a blockade. It says that your blockade, we're going to respond to your blockade with a blockade on you. And they said not a single Saudi, ship has passed through the strait, through the Bab al-Mandab, and they're going to continue that until this situation going to come down or resolve. This is the problem that Saudi Arabia has created for itself, and nobody can resolve it for them.
But Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I can't answer the question. Why did Saudi Arabia go into Yemen to begin? Now we know why, because the Ansarallah overthrew the Yemeni government, which was a pro-Saudi government, and that's linked to policies that Saudi Arabia has been using to try and impose itself on Yemen for years and all that stuff. But the problem was always Saudi Arabia. The problem has always been Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia pictured itself as a regional military superpower. Look at why does the UAE do what it does in Africa? Because it's in competition with Saudi Arabia, that's seeking to make itself a regional power by controlling various governments and resource intensive regions. And UAE's responded by trying to take control of ports and things like that. So there's this regional superpower competition taking place that's created a problem in Sudan. It's bled over into Chad. It's bleeding over elsewhere. It doesn't need to happen. I mean, if the Saudis would just take a cue from, China and just let it happen, baby. First of all, you don't have to be at war with Yemen. Just treat them with respect. And if you treat them with respect, it's going to be amazing what's going to happen, because Saudi Arabia, because of its position as a major energy producer, has the ability to influence, the economy of the region, unlike any other nation. I mean, similar to Iran. And again, if you let Saudi Arabia and Iran peacefully coexist, a natural balance will occur. A natural balance will occur. Instead of trying to impose your will, accept what the natural balance is, and then make that, thrive, knowing that there are limitations to what you can do. But both, Saudi Arabia and I would say Iran has to be careful not to become guilty of this, is seeking to make their reach greater than it naturally should be. There are things, that the natural flow of events allow, a nation with specific population, resources, et cetera, to say this is our, what should be our normative sphere of influence. Saudi Arabia could do the same